This particular conversation with my Jehovah's Witness friend is specifically about the 144,000 and overlapping generations. I didn't question her too much on this. I just really wanted to hear how she was going to present it, and I didn't challenge her on these things, and I noticed that she did kind of avoid talking about 1914 because for many, many, many years they were saying the statement, millions now living will never die, and that related to the 144,000 who were born around or before 1914. Even that teaching changed periodically, but the point was for a long time that if you were alive in 1914 and you were one of the 144,000, then Armageddon would come before you died. And of course that didn't happen, and they pretty much are all now dead. So they've had to change it to the overlapping generations, which really doesn't make any sense. I'm not sure where she got a generation is 10 years from. It was creative anyway. So I'd love to hear from JWs who are more recently woken up, and read your feedback about what you shared when you went door to door about the overlapping generations, because I know a lot of JWs feel very uncomfortable with trying to promote that. It doesn't make a lot of sense, and if a person tries to push you too much on it, then I know a lot of JWs will just shut down and say that's it, I don't want to talk anymore. So, or they'll change the subject, or basically it's a tough one. So we didn't get too far in this one, but I do question her more on 1914 in the future. This is just kind of a little bit of a beginning with some of her feedback, and I was just listening at this point. So I hope it's interesting, and would love to know what your thoughts are on it.
Okay, so are they... I don't know a lot about your kind of views on these sorts of things, so bear with me.
I appreciate talking to somebody who asks questions, who wants to know and ask questions. Because for us to be talking and telling, going to door and telling people something, we may not be addressing their questions. So I appreciate somebody talking and asking a question so that I can address it,
Yeah, okay.
And I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, and for me, this is going off on a bit of a side tangent, but I think it's really important to, if we disagree on things and we want to discuss those and kind of flesh everything out, it's really important that, and tell me if you agree with this, that we understand what the other person believes so that we can represent each other properly.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, how else can we address the issue?
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. Okay. I'm glad we agree on that, because I do think that's really important. Okay. So, how do the 144,000 relate to you? Do you know any of them, or what's your relationship to them? Right now?
Yeah, there are. They're on the earth now. Some of them, a lot of them. Of course, they've been being collected when Jesus at Pentecost started gathering them. That's what he said he came to earth for, was to gather the lost sheep of Israel.
Okay.
But there are right down. So Jesus said right down to the very last days, which we are in, that there would be those holy ones.
Okay.
And but I don't know anybody personally. I did know some of a couple that were when we lived when I was a kid, and they were like what they call pioneering, which was doing missionary work.
Mm-hmm.
And they never spoke of it. They had this relationship with God, and with Jesus, and they never talked about it. The only way we knew is they would partake of the emblems at the memorial of Jesus' death.
Okay. And so do they know how many are still partaking?
Yes, and the reason they know that is because, as I say, each year there's an anniversary of Christ's death, and those who partake of the bread and the wine then are counted. Okay. So there's about a little over 10,000 on that consider themselves part of the 144,000.
Okay. I didn't realize that. Okay. Okay, and I know I did hear a little bit, and maybe you can clarify for me, about, this is sort of a huge subject, and we don't need to get all into the details, I guess, but with 1914, how does that relate to the 144,000? Because I had heard something about how the last of the 144,000 would have been born before 1914 or something like that.
Yeah, that was a thought that was.
I'm sorry, my cat's crying.
Thought, as a biblical truth about before 70. I think about 82. I think it was that. And the reason that witnesses thought that was because when Jesus talked about to the Pharisees about this generation will not pass away, so that those members of the 144,000 who are in New York, who are called the governing body, they said, well, that must mean that anybody who was born in 1914 and was anointed during 1914 would, during that period from 1914, would be, that the kingdom would be soon, But that didn't change the fact that 1914 was the birth of the kingdom in heaven. And so there's a little bit of a different thought now of what generation means, because a generation overlaps periods, like one, like a generation is considered 10 years, but the one born in the beginning of the 10-year period is of the same generation who was of an individual who was born at the end. There would be a 10 years difference almost, but they're of the same generation because their lives overlapped, you know what I mean?
Okay, I think I understand.
So there's still, a generation isn't considered just from one date to another. It overlaps,
Okay, yeah, I think
so. That's my, I hope I'm explaining that.
Yeah.
Enough,
I think so, yeah.